Hello, everyone. This is the Rise of Privacy Tech's webcast. I'm Lourdes Turrecha, the founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech. And for this month's Women's History Month, I am really excited to bring on fearless founders in the privacy tech space. Today, we have Arti Raman of Titaniam and Leila Golchehreh from Reliance.ai. Leila, did I say that correctly?
Perfect. You're doing great.
And if I didn't, please correct me. We may have Finneran-Dennedy joining us shortly. Today, I'm really excited because I want to feature the amazing work that these women have been doing in the privacy tech space. Let's start off with quick intros. I see that Michelle has just joined us. Hi, Mickey. Welcome to the Rise of Privacy Tech's webcast episode for Women's History Month. We also have Finneran-Dennedy, who is one of the veteran chief privacy officers and female founders in the privacy tech space. Ladies, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to do quick intros, starting with Arti. Arti.
Thank you, Lourdes. My name is Arti Raman. I'm the founder of Titaniam. Titaniam is technically a data protection company, but the way we have set it up, we meet a really important data privacy goal. And so our thesis at Titaniam is that if you put data into a default private format upfront, then as it flows through the organization, it remains private and protected. And so by doing that, we think we can deal with a number of super important problems like data privacy, obviously, but also data ethics, which is super important in today's AI world and data mining world. Things like insider threats, like people inside organizations that may or may not remain positive could become bad actors. Things like third-party risks as our data flows through our extended supplier networks. And finally, what is top of mind these days, undetected attackers. We're seeing companies come down like dominoes. So how can you keep those crown jewels safe? So Titaniam essentially is at that meeting point between data privacy and data protection. And I'm so excited to be here to share our story as well as collaborate with these other amazing privacy tech founders. So thank you for having me, Lourdes.
Thank you, Arti. Leila, we'd love to hear more about you and your background. Please take
Sure. Thank you, Arti. What a great background. And thank you, Lourdes, for hosting. This is such an important initiative and so great to be a part of it. So I'm Leila Golchehreh, the co-founder and co-CEO of Reliance.ai. By trade, I am an attorney, a data protection lawyer. I have been practicing for 13 years. I was in private practice and I advised companies everywhere from healthcare tech to IoT to autonomous vehicles and fintech and others. I was in-house at Workday and then I left to take on a role as a global data protection officer at Adaptive Insights. And while I was there, I had 4.5 months to get a 15-year-old company ready for the GDPR. It was pretty wild. It was also alongside a parallel IPO timeline. And at that time, I demoed every privacy tech tool on the market, and I was just struck by the complete lack of good tooling in the space. I found a few workflow solutions, but nothing met my needs. It didn't give me the transparency that I needed in order to do my job effectively. So what I needed was to be deeply embedded into existing engineering processes, into code. I needed visibility and transparency on what was going on with data and a cross-functional tool that would allow me to really effectively collaborate with people just across the entire organization. So Reliance.ai is all about flipping existing approaches completely on their head. We're just throwing out the spreadsheets that we have been using for so long. We're throwing out the forms, the Word documents, and workflow solutions, which is bad data in and bad data out. Our focus is on using machine learning and deep technical instrumentation to match the speed of dev and business operations to the speed of privacy, compliance, and legal requirements. Privacy really can't be effective by just playing catch up or working in a silo. We really need good tooling that's embedded within business and engineering processes, and that's what we're here to build.
Leila, you're making everyone in privacy operations heard. That resonates with a lot of the privacy pros out there. Mickey, someone commented, when everyone knows who you are in privacy, you don't even need to put your name down. But for those who don't know you,
I like that I'm privacy dork. I may just adopt that.
Love it.
Oh no. And of course, like, this is startup hair, y'all. I just got off the call with an investor and I was like, it's 9:00, get on the next thing. So welcome to the wild and wacky, unmade up world of privacy tech. I'm Finneran-Dennedy. I've been in the privacy space as long as there's been a privacy space, I guess. I was the first chief privacy officer at Sun, and then I did sales and set up a security sales team at Oracle after we were acquired. I was brought in by the M&A team to McAfee Intel to set that program up. Adorable, and we'll get into this conversation later. You know, that was sort of a 27-year Rube Goldberg, like, duct tape version was McAfee of all of these collective acquisitions. And we'll see this in the privacy space in years to come. They glued together 27 different startups to create a big security conglomerate and a platform. And along the way, I asked their CEO at the time, he was exiting because of the acquisition. I said, where's the data? Where is the data protection? And he's like, oh, we don't have any data. We just have metadata. We just have business data. So we don't have data. And I think that's emblematic of a lot of the beliefs of early stage as well as even very advanced stage companies. So going in there with that mindset, and it was at that point that Jonathan Fox, my father, Tom Finneran, and I published the Privacy Engineers Manifesto, which really is not an engineering tome. So don't put any more reviews on my Amazon saying it's not a technical know-how tool. It's not. It's a manifesto. It's about the policy, how you convert that into the development process and supply chain process, how you measure QA, how you look at value and valuation, and how we go forward. And so we published that in those days. And then I was recruited in really via the book to Cisco to set up their program. A lot like Leila, 18 months before GDPR, they were like, hey, maybe we should have a privacy officer. Hey, good plan. So we got that ramped up and brought in a great team there. Harvey Jang took over the reins when I dived into Startup Landia. So right now I am working with a bunch of early stagers, fundraising and helping them get formulated. I'm working on a couple products of my own with some of my favorite privacy and security engineers, and consulting with Colonel Brian Lee at Privatus Online. Long-winded.
Thank you for that storied experience and background, Mickey. Thank you for sharing that snippet with us. I want us to dig in into the privacy tech landscape in general. You know, many of us are privacy practitioners, and some of us are from cybersecurity, like Arti and Mickey. We've also worked for cybersecurity startups as well. I'd love to learn how, or hear about how you ended up building tools in privacy tech and what interests you the most about this space. Mickey, take us away.
Yeah, oh gosh, I will try to be as brief as I possibly can. It's been a dream since, I think I first wrote a paper called Privacy Engineering in 2002. We were actually going on an APEC tour when we were setting up the accountability framework, and we were going to Beijing to have a really interesting conversation with the law school there and some practitioners there as they were whipping up what would ultimately be their 2005 law. And the reason that we called it privacy engineering was sort of a pun between my dad and myself, because the original engineers actually would certify themselves as professional engineers. And in doing so, you submitted to a code of conduct. So a PE always had ethics in mind. It always was baked in, and they always thought about the entire system, the soft system, not just data cradle to grave, but wherever this is going to impact or harm or touch, a professional engineer has an ethical code not to harm things. So that's when my interest really started is, you know, where do you apply? I'm not an engineer by schooling. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology, but an engineer is not someone with a EE or an MA or computer science degree necessarily. Under the official professional engineering code, an engineer is someone who solves problems with the tools that they have. So I'm excited to hear the other ladies' journeys too, of trying and picking up tools, seeing how we could fit them into the stack of the fair information principle, so that we're not just being transparent, because, you know, transparency of the ugly is just ugly. transparent, of good process, and having controls means that we start to take productive ownership. And it's going to take the production of new tools. We will duct tape together some ugly ducklings and then turn them into pretty platforms as we go along, as did our friends in security. And we need buyers. So we're going to talk about that too, about the rise of the privacy officer, the power of budget, the power of partnering with your technological leaders and not deferring and saying, hey, could you please build something that's privacy by design? Because we're not going to get there, and the funders are not going to continue to keep the funds coming to these up and coming companies if they feel like there's no TAM or total addressable market.
Yeah, well, I love that you just spoke about the market, and that's how I think about privacy. The privacy tech market is really in its infancy, and I also like that you referenced the security market. I mean, I look at that industry; it's $250 billion industry. And it's pretty mature, and privacy is just sort of coming up. And what I've seen is that organizations often don't give privacy sort of the same level of deference as security. But I think we're missing out on a huge opportunity here. And just the privacy in its infancy state as a sort of new type of technology is already valued at over $120 billion market. So this market might be even bigger than security. And I think there are a lot of opportunities here, and that's what Reliance is after.
So my journey is a little bit different coming at it from the security side. When I started Titanium, I did it for a privacy reason. So essentially, it was horrifying to me. I'm from India, so my entire country lost their fingerprints in one breach, right? So you look at what data breaches do to data privacy, and it's horrifying. I got 10 fingers, I'm going to run out. And at some point, I won't be able to get a new ID. Same with your voice print, same with your retina scan. So my thought was, this is terrible, because not only do we have major privacy violations with breaches, but then every time you lose identity data, you have one privacy problem, but then that goes to create other breaches. It's like a circle, right? You steal identity data, you can use it to breach another system, steal more identity data. So you've got this like growing terrible spiral. And I thought that is something I should try to, bring my resources together and do something about. So the starting point was, how can we make data that's private, personal data usable while protecting privacy? And that's where our technology started. And we're definitely in the security camp as well. But I think data ethics and privacy, we're not going to get there if we don't make this, a little more balanced. The other thing that I thought was crazy, I still think is crazy, is how easily people give up their private data. It's like this push-pull between convenience, right? Sure, it's so easy to get my face scanned. I like Face ID. You take that data and people are willingly giving it away. And then you got all of those privacy violations on the other end. So I thought, well, that's not going to stop. I think it will take a long time before we can educate the average person on what is done with their personal data. We sort of have to shift responsibility on the organizations that are capturing it and make sure they have the tools to deal with that safely, et cetera. So the privacy use case was a big driver for me, and that's why I think it is actually going to be almost a bigger deal than security. I agree with Leila, because it is in the fabric of our lives, right? There is so much data. We have to have the tools and the awareness and the education. So that's sort of where we ended up with privacy.
I think you're on mute, Lourdes.
You're on mute.
Thank you for that, Arti. We can go so many places from there, and I love how you touched upon how people and users in general are apparently giving away their data. We do have work in the privacy space that address the myth of the privacy paradox, and that's not for today, but it's a fascinating space touching upon how different companies are using dark patterns to get individuals to give up their personal data. But I want to stay on the point that we were talking about on security and privacy. So those are very distinct domains, right? But they also intersect. So with privacy, you're really looking at personal data, whereas in security, you are looking at all types of data and the confidentiality and integrity and availability of those data and the infrastructure. Arti, how do you think about the intersection between these two, despite these two domains being very distinct?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of my security practice, if you will, I think the set of controls is common. So privacy is obviously about everything leading up to enforcement, making sure you have the process, you have the consent, and you guys are experts, right? You have permission, you use the data for what you said you would, and so on. But at the end of the day, if you don't have an enforcement mechanism, you are chasing that data across the organization. And that's where I think like some standard security controls can come into play. And the more upfront you can plug them in, the better. So I think security can be an enabler for privacy in a really significant way. And so if our security technologies and platforms can keep that requirement in mind, I think we can be really helpful to the privacy cause. The other thing I think that can be helpful is that privacy often is staffed by people from the legal profession and people that have a very good understanding of what ought to be done, but maybe not enough. And I don't mean to generalize, but maybe not enough of an awareness of what tooling can be used and what the cutting edge technologies have to offer. So I think security can be leveraged there as well, because we already have a set of messages. We already have, some of these communication mechanisms and enforcement mechanisms. So I think there's a very big partnership to be had. In fact, I think we're all impacted, whether we have a privacy compromise or a security compromise. There's just tons of shared impact. So I think that it is super important for that collaboration.
Totally agree with everything you just said, Arti. I think that these domains are so closely linked. They're obviously unique, but directly tied to each other. And, I think that the security industry has been just blessed with so many types of different tooling and deep technical tooling that's embedded within workflows where you can actually execute on controls in the DevOps lifecycle within the code itself. And privacy has just been deprived of this. And I think it's really time that changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so exciting. So many ways to take this one. So it's a multidisciplinary, I can't say it. It's a multidisciplinary practice. And I think that makes it hard to sell into because you often have multiple stakeholders. But it also means it's got so much opportunity, as all of you guys have alluded to and mentioned directly. Privacy and privacy tech is not some sort of a checkbox to say, hey, I'm compliant with last year's breach prevention, because that really can be something containable or something that's sort of paperwork. To me, the essence of privacy defined operationally is the authorized processing, and processing can mean deleting or just keeping or holding of personally identifiable and personal information according to moral, ethical, legal, and commercially sustainable principles. So if you break that down, as your technical teams like to do, they're very literal. You can break that down into stages and say, what are we doing on the authorization side? And authorization is not the same as incoming consent. So throughout the life cycle, throughout the use of data, is it still authorized? Is it still contextually okay? Is it still something that's valuable to the company? Or has it turned into what I call, actually, Dara O'Brien said this first from Castlebridge Associates, the data liability tornado. So you have these big buckets of data that are not serving the business, have no correlation, have no owners usually, because the owners may have even left the business, and there's just this pocket of vulnerable data sitting around, and it has turned from an asset into a liability. And so I think look at it from the asset and liability side. An asset is only distinguished from a liability in that there are controls around something that can create value potentially for the organization. If the controls aren't there, it can be a liability. Obviously, an active attack that your security brethren understand very, very well, that's a liability too, but it's more of a vulnerability than an active liability. So privacy, I agree with these ladies, must be different definitionally, is broader than the practices that contain and control this ephemeral intellectual property that we call data about describing or grouping human beings. So remember, it's not just, if you're tuning into this, you probably, like, this is old news to you, but privacy, I've heard a billion times from a billion different clients, is not about like, oh, I'm at work and so therefore I'm not private, or I'm at the mall and therefore my face is fair game to all. No. Authorized, processing, morally, what would your grandmother do? Ethically, what should your brand do? Legally, there's a whole bunch of complexity there, and commercially sustainable. And if you start with just what can I get away with commercially sustainable, I think you're going to continue the bad practices that we've had, strapping together sites. And you can even hear it from the VC community in the past saying, oh, you don't need privacy, let the acquisitive company handle it. Well, we're seeing huge discount or rejection of deals if you haven't curated your data asset, especially coming out of 2020. Most businesses are recognizing that their virtual assets, sometimes about people, sometimes about people in metadata, are probably some of their most valuable things. So if you're building a privacy tech company and you're applying it and you're pitching to companies, understand that the risk that you're protecting is so far beyond GDPR fines. You are really protecting the opportunity of that business or operation or governmental agency to go forward in the world and do what it needs to do for itself.
Right, and that opportunity and trust and your brand. And I think that is something we should definitely talk about, because I think a lot of privacy professionals have just been in a lot of pain, quite frankly, because it's like, it's a Herculean effort to be expected to run a global data protection program without good tooling. I mean, when I was the DPO at Adaptive Insights with a short amount of time to roll out a GDPR program, I had no idea where data was being processed. I needed to basically figure this out without good tooling. I mean, you know, when every workflow solution didn't give me that level of visibility, and I basically had to sit in meetings and fill out forms. And this is the circular world in which privacy professionals live. It's actually pretty unbelievable. I mean, especially when you think about the level of responsibility that you have, right? And I think now where there's more privacy tech popping up, it's actually a really exciting time to take a look at this market holistically, to develop, you know, really platform level types of solutions. So you can't operate by playing catch up or relying on you know, basically hearsay. I mean, imagine a litigator, right? If a litigator constantly relying on what people tell him or her in order to make a case, would probably get thrown out of court. And yet this is how we run privacy. It's based on hearsay all the time, which is actually pretty mind-boggling when you sit down and think about it.
You ladies make such great points about needing to go beyond compliance and making sure that the products that we're creating are more than just commercially viable, more than just compliant. And we have a commenter address that too with the business model issue that we have today. Many of the startups and businesses coming out with just what's commercially viable and business models that don't go beyond what's ethical and moral and what's privacy protective in this space. That said, I wanna take this to a lighter point, and you know, you can be as playful as you want. I'm curious. Right. I might regret this later. In this very nascent privacy tech space, which we've touched upon earlier, it's such a niche space. Aside from the products that you're using, what types of privacy tech tools would you like to see out there?
That is a good question. I love it. Okay, yeah, it's going to really be hard not to talk about Reliance.ai, especially because this is based directly on the pain I experienced as a privacy counsel. So apart from this, so how about a universal extension for my browser that allows me to just select all my cookie preferences for banners? So I just actually adjust these preferences in a single place, and then that applies across every type of cookie banner that exists. And if someone doesn't build this, maybe Reliance.ai will, and then maybe we will open source it.
My answer is kind of related to how I'm thinking at Titanium. We come in after, like, we need to be told what to protect. And I would so love if we could move that identification into the data itself. if there was a way to build it in, right? That makes it so fundamental, because today there's data discovery, data classification, and then we come in and we'll build, our engines to identify, and people are using NLP and people are using DLP and stuff. But it would be so good if the data could self-identify. So when it was collected, and then, folks like myself and others can just do amazing things with that data as it flows through. So that would be my wish. And just like Leila said, if no one does it, and I got some time on space on my roadmap, maybe we'll do it. But
do it.
Do it. Exactly.
I want to dive in here to highlight a couple of things that are slightly separate. Then I promise I will get back, because we are having fun. Remember, Lourdes is like very nervous now.
No, go.
She's like, what did we say this time? Well, I think one of the things I want to point out is in the field of privacy, it's no mistake that there's a lot of women here. These were the unwanted jobs. I would love to tell you that we're just more brilliant and we're just da-da-da-da-da, but the reality is nobody wanted to do the jobs of the yeoman's thing, as Leila said, interviewing human beings to hear about the metadata columns and rows. It's ka-sha-sha-sha. So there we were, and suddenly, and now we are about 50-50, a little bit better than 50-50 women. So the women practitioners out there outnumber the men. If you look at the men in privacy tech, they're way outstripping the ladies. So first of all, don't be afraid as a practitioner to turn into a founder. It's terrifying, but so's your day job. So it's fun. Dive in the water. Secondly, I want to highlight what both of these women did as really beacons of leadership for privacy founders. If someone asks you, what is the tool that you would want to build? Your answer had better be your tool. It had better be. Because I tell you what, I actually can curl my hair and do my stuff. This is the life of the privacy founder. You run through walls, you take 1,000 rejections, you fight like hell because you believe that your company is going to add value. And you're not, if you wanted to just make money, you would still be in the security side, because it still is fat enough, it's crowded, but it's fat enough with big known paychecks and big known problems. And if you can slightly, get to your P1s faster than the other guy's P1, huzzah, they know how to buy them. So you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to change the world. So I love that both of these women, the first thing they said was, what tool? It's like, don't be humble, y'all. The investors in your company, don't be humble. Your tools rock. So I'll say that for my, if you want to be a founder, you got to be a founder. So I love that you did that first off.
Necessity is the mother of invention. So totally agree. But you didn't tell us your tool, Mickey. You got to tell us yours now.
I'm a little bit in stealth, so we're kind of reformulating things. So I've kind of retrenched, but it's going to be very cool. I'm working with only people who are with deep practitioner stuff. We sort of lost our mojo for a moment. The other stuff that I'm working on, and I work with cool clients like Privitar, who's a proud sponsor of the Rise of Privacy Tech, and do segmentation, lift and segment. Jane Mansfield had the best security idea back in the 70s. All the non-Americans don't ask what that question means. But working with Provatus is my consulting firm. We actually go from the top of the sandwich down. So as we're talking about what tools do you need, the question that you ask as a privacy professional, if you're a buyer of these tools, is what problem am I trying to solve? And that sounds like such an obvious thing. But what you hear is what is everyone else buying and how do I get compliant? No, if your question is, where is my data? That's a question, that's a problem. Now, what do you mean by where? In the custody of whom? In what kind of controls? And now you're interrogating tools as a buyer. You would never buy a pair of pants with 3 legs. Don't buy a tool that solves problems that you don't have. That doesn't mean you can't grow and scale and have something that's extensible, but really think about your problems first and how you'll measure. And then on the other side of the scale is, once you've tooled and once you've looked around at the other tools that are already in your shop, I guarantee you have a DNS. I guarantee you've got some sort of DLP solution rolling around in there. There is data in them, there hills. Figure out what you can put together with your current platform. How are you going to be fed that information in a consumable sense, report it upwards as strategy trends to your board, as operational requirements to your cohorts, and as, like my partner Provatus, Colonel Lee likes to say, laminate for the field. There should be a standard SDLC process so that when you're securely creating code, there is a process to follow, laminate it every time. At the top, if you need to course correct because you're measuring the effectiveness, are you still getting code out on time? I guarantee you, if you're doing privacy and security design early, don't believe the myth that all the developers are going to put their little arms under their armpits and say, I'm going to go eat my Doritos elsewhere and I'm not going to help you. They might say that, but guess what? They don't want you to throw out their code. They don't want you to slow them down. So by laminating the process, being very clear and specific about the data stories you want your data tools to tell you, you can have a very clear, open, and careful conversation that allows you to document the process, create a scoping workshop, have deliverables agreed to by people who are maybe tasked with marketing. They're not tasked with your privacy compliance problem. How do you get them information they can use? How does that information relate to and correlate to how much money we spent on marketing and how much money that made us? That's a CFO's problem. You can see the interoperability of privacy goes across the C-suite. Makes it hard to sell into, but if you have a story for your tool or service that you're providing to the privacy officer about how they can tell the story laterally, tell it north and tell it south and laminate that card, you're going to be in really good shape.
Mickey, you asked a really good question about what privacy problem are you trying to solve? And Leila mentioned, we do want to change the world. This is why we're starting these startups in this space. So I want to ask each one of you, which privacy problems are you trying to solve in this privacy tech space, and how are the products that you're building solving those privacy problems? Mickey, do you want to start us off?
I will. I'll start on two fronts. I think what we're building with the sort of scorecarding services side of Provatus is, what are the ESG terms in your environmental, social, and governance terms in your board declaration that will show progress that you're actually governing the sovereign duty you have to protect human data, your employees, your customers, your shareholders. What are those ESG numbers? We don't have a formula yet for what each kind of company has. So figuring out how do we pull the metrics out of the tools we have, deliver them in a strategy packet I never ever want to see another board document that says, we did 75% of our PIAs. Guess what? You're legally obligated to do 100%, y'all. That should not be in your board declaration. And if it is, that should be a flag to the now non-existent, but hopefully soon, board members to say, why am I getting operational details rather than a strategic trajectory of results? So that's the top layer of what are the metrics that we need. Now, how do we get the tools to build them from the bottom? We have a growing cadre of complianceware that's making it better to report and making more consistent. And there's GUIs that people know how to fill out. It's kind of like Quicken for privacy, right? What we're really working on is, how do we get back into the scoping workshop? What we call shift left privacy is way back before any sort of code gets dropped, before any sort of supply chain is built. And obviously we're not going to get a fresh field. So part of the go-to-market is, how does this matter to existing messy legacy systems? So that's where I'm really looking. I'm looking very early in the development process and the delivery across the data supply chain.
That's great. Maybe I can add a little bit of color, because I think what we do complements your thinking a little bit downstream. So one of the biggest challenges there is the big mass of data that already exists in companies. So you can start greenfield and put in privacy by design, assuming you have the buy-in, and that's great. We can help with that as well. But one of the things I thought we should take on is building Lego blocks, building modular pieces that companies can take and put in their existing systems. You might have a 20-year-old HR system that, ends up being available to the guy that's re-upping badges for your building, right? Like, it's a silly example, right? So someone loses a badge. They go into the security office. Those guys, need to validate, hey, are you really an employee? They'll pull up your HR system. That thing is 20 years old. They can see everything about this person. Oh, that's a problem, right? And so those sorts of use cases with super old systems, our idea was, we're in the enforcement business. We do two things, right? We create a set of controls that can implement privacy policy. So you can say who gets to see what, who gets to do what with the data, where is the data allowed to go, etc. But we can also report on that. So how do you get that out of these old legacy systems and this old legacy infrastructure? So for that, we'll give you an API, we'll give you a proxy, we'll give you, we have like 5 different ways you can do that, mix and match. And I think one of the most powerful things about us is that, like, we're not saying, hey, I'm a cloud service. Give me all your private data. I'm going to lock it up in my vault here. And you can do that for maybe 2-3% of your super, crown jewel type of data. But what are you going to do with the bulk of the data that flows through your organization? So that's one of the things that we tackle at Titanium, which is we will go where you are, where your data is. Doesn't matter, how it's architected, and we'll give you pieces that you can put together. And then we can enforce for your privacy officer, your data protection officer, and we can report as well. And so we think we're sort of like the next tool. Once you have a good understanding of what you want to do on the privacy side, we can help make that a reality. The other thing we do, which is sort of the default position, we'll say, okay, maybe it's going to take you a long time to get there. Maybe you haven't started yet. You have a big process to do all of this. Maybe your organization is not mature. Why don't we plug ourselves in anyway, and we'll just do that for everything? And I actually think, why not, right? I have a big blob of stuff that I put into S3. I just throw stuff into the cloud in Amazon, and I don't know what it's doing, and I don't know where it's landing, and I don't know who's retrieving it, and it's going to take me 2 years to get my arms around that. So I'll just say, hey, just stick my proxy between you and the S3, and I'm just going to protect everything. And then you can sort it out. And so at least we're giving you a default status for your data. And so, again, coming from the intersection between security and privacy, it isn't as complete of a privacy story, but I definitely see us as a huge enabler for helping, you guys and your companies meet that objective.
I love the interoperability, because you can't really, there's a company that sells pipe and there's another company that delivers clean water. So yes, they're separate, but if they're not interoperable,
totally interrelated.
Exactly. So we think we can bring those policies to life, and we can do that without, disrupting and performing heart surgery on what you already have. So that's the value proposition.
That's
Leila,
great.
how about you?
Yeah. So from my experience, 95% of data protection professionals I know are still living in spreadsheets and forms and these manual workflow solutions. And this is crazy. It is 2021. Engineering teams have been, kind of spoiled with these wonderful types of tooling for years, if not decades. And so Reliance is really reflecting the market, which is when you're looking at the existing tech that exists in privacy, the reality isn't reflected. The understanding of data is not correct. Privacy teams, GRC teams, security engineering, we're great at putting together policies, controls, and contracts. But what always kept me up at night was just the not knowing what happens after I put the words on the page and not seeing that through to execution and ensuring that these controls are really reflected. Was this being executed? Where are my blind spots? So here we are in 2021 and, still, again, relying on hearsay to build data protection programs. And, our world of data protection professionals is relying on sitting in meetings with cross-functional teams and asking them, what are you doing with the data? And then we put that in a form. And then we look at the form and we ask the same teams, is this correct? And then this is the vicious circle that is our universe. So our vision is just, again, to flip this approach on its head. Privacy must be embedded into the way that things are actually operating on the business level, on the engineering level, on the code level. We need to use machine learning to really reimagine this whole space.
Thanks for that, Leila. And you're absolutely correct. It's such a cross-functional space, privacy is, and you need to work with businesses, with engineering, with lawyers, like Arti was touching upon earlier. And so it becomes quite difficult given the cross-functional nature of privacy. You might even deal with auditors and marketing folks in this space. Who do you end up selling to? And that's one of the trickiest questions that I really push the privacy tech founders I work with to define very early on. And it might be that, the answer isn't quite clear yet. Like Mickey was saying, we need to be better as privacy professionals. We need to be better when it comes to asking for budget and demanding the tools that we need to do our work. But I'm curious how you ladies have defined or answered that question when it comes to your own startups.
Privacy is probably one of the most cross-functional areas of any organization. It is sort of the square peg in the round hole. It doesn't quite fit really nicely into any team, but it fits into every team. And I think that is in large part because privacy is everyone's responsibility. So at Reliance, we've seen, of course, a lot of lawyers adopting our solution in the private beta, but we've also seen engineers, CISOs, security professionals, and it's really exciting. And we have really built from a cross-functional place from day one. Our goal is to allow everyone to start speaking the same language for kind of the first time ever. Actually, we just did another implementation last week with another new customer and part of our private beta. And it was just really exciting to see how delighted the engineers were to see things popping up that they themselves didn't know about. Our machine learning models got to work in minutes. And for us as founders, this is probably one of the most exciting things, is to give a level of visibility and transparency that never existed before. And then just to give some perspective on the impact of our machine learning models, what took me as an in-house professional as well as external counsel 4 to 5 months to build, it cost me $500,000, is now taking 4 to 5 hours with our machine learning models.
Yeah, I'll dive in on this one because I've been living this dream for a long time. I think, the easy money when I'm talking to investors is CISOs have cash, and that's where I'm going to start. It's a kind of a good go-to-market strategy. It's not a dumb thing to do, and they do have budget and they do know how to deal with tech. That said, I think if you already have an unfair advantage in that you are a privacy professional and you have colleagues in the marketplace, bring them into the meeting. And many times I've done this for, it feels like centuries. I will have introduced the CISO to the CPO at the meeting. And I'm going, at every IPP conference I have attended and participated in and spoken since 2002, I have said, if you do nothing else tomorrow, I want you to calendar coffee, drinks, hikes, Zooms with your colleague that's going to make you effective. So whether that's someone in audit who understands technology audit and controls, whether that's your CISO, and sometimes they can be a little touchy because they feel like privacy equals secrecy, and so they need a little bit of bring them along. Go to where the pain is. So think about this, like the CFO did not exist until there was dual book accounting. And now, can you even imagine a large public corporation without a chief financial officer? How many people within the organization deal with, spend, or somehow interact with money? Almost all of them. So if your sales guys are having trouble turning in their expenses, ultimately the owner of that problem is the CFO. However, who's having the pain? It's the sales guy. So when you're asking the problem, who's got the pain? Sometimes your market is marketing. If you've got a better capsule solution for a good chunk of data that's going to either strip out PII, which I think is like, that's cute, but it's not your whole solution. I would say, how does this inform the context and how do I know its life cycle? Then I would talk to my R&D people that are having a problem accessing the mountains of experimental data, particularly in pharma right now, right? We're in the middle of our COVID nightmare. The R&D people desperately want that information. There's some organizations that react to that by dumping data lakes together and praying. There's the wise ones are saying, hey, there's this new privacy tech. I can encapsulate, I can segment, I can do machine learning algorithms that are based on observations rather than judgment, which is where you get into the ethical. I'm going to solve that problem for you. But as I'm doing it, bring in your colleague from the privacy office so they know what's going on in the business, so that they understand how they're going to get those metrics and be able to do their ESG reporting. And then I think we'll start to behave a lot more like the financial types of tooling, where budgeting, calendaring, coming up with your expenses, HR, all of these things. The expense part goes to the CFO, which we know and love, and the other part might go to the human resources department. So all of these things didn't exist at one time. Look at how they grew. Look at how, what I always call is the privacy stack. And in my view, I'm seeing Arti and Leila are on top of each other here in the stack. If you're buying one and only tool and you're saying that you are compliant, and God help you, if you say that you're GDPR certified, I'm going to come to your home. I don't know what I'm going to do there, but I'm going to come to your home and annoy you, because you need to think about this as a stack. There's not going to be one tool that solves all your problems. This is going to be conditional stacks of things. Maybe one day we'll have something that's broad enough and rich enough and deep enough to solve all of your problems. But that would mean that they had 1,000 Artis and 1,000 Leilas, 1,000 Lourdes, and 1,000 Michelles sitting around thinking about these hard problems for you. It's very unlikely in privacy tech today that you're going to solve more than one problem extraordinarily well with a young company.
Oh man, Mickey, we're trying to be the platform solution at Reliance.ai.
Let me answer that specific question a little more specifically. Who is the buyer for us? And the reason I think it's interesting to lend my voice here is that the privacy drum has been beaten pretty loud in the last 2 years. And that has created a privacy mandate across the organization. And so granted, there are companies more advanced than others, but the typical company that I go in and talk to, there's like 4 different people that have a privacy mandate that don't know how to implement it. So starting from the CISO, the chief data officer, which is another new role, right? With all of the data science work that's happening, the chief privacy officer, and then also the architects themselves, so the information security architects. So those are the 4 people that we talk to that say, and I'll without naming the company, so I talk to a telco, and the telco has data that flows through their organization, and depending on where that traffic is captured, it's subject to the GDPR and some of these other regulations. Those architects have absolutely no idea how to wrap their arms. And we're not talking social security numbers or credit. We're talking like IP addresses, device IDs, MAC IDs, right? Things that identify users. So those are the sorts of people when we go, even though we ride the security slipstream sometimes, when we go in and they say, hey, I got this mandate, I'm able to say, let me tell you how you can put some controls around that. And that is the breadth of the buyers we're talking to. So thankfully, from our perspective, each of them actually have a purchasing mandate. So that works very well. I imagine from a privacy platform standpoint, you probably have to get buy-in from multiple people. But from where I sit, I'm actually going in after the mandate, which I'm happy to be in that position that we can fulfill that mandate for them. Does that make sense, Michelle, in terms of?
It totally does. And you know, there are so many people, and I love that you raised the CDO, because it's a new recognized discipline, but it goes back like 50 years. There's things like DAMA about data quality and
yeah.
God help us, document retention. Bless your hearts if anyone's a document retention person. I mean, I do privacy, and I think doc retention is even harder. But there's also like, where do things get built? So when we built the SDLC program for Cisco, for example, Lisa Bobbitt, who is my chief privacy engineer, we would go to the SDLC people, and they were doing sort of they call it DevSecOps, which is kind of falls in and out of favor, but they had Scrum Masters as if it was a hybrid of an agile development. So we would train the Scrum Masters And we would say, this is what a privacy red flag defect is. This is the thing that you have to at least notice. And then the other constituency we went to was the people who were actually dealing with customer questions. So we had a customer information center that would light up like a Christmas tree the last 2 weeks before a quarter. That's when we make all our money in tech in particular. And it's true for almost every other industry. These people have a rich source of where is the problem in your stack? Where is the confusion? What do consumers want to know about? So you can go there and figure out what are the care abouts, and you can report on those. Those are beautiful metrics. You can also take those care abouts back to your Scrum Masters, back to your PMs, back to the product managers. And sometimes when you're in-house, your constituencies sort of change over and over again until you can come up with that laminated single process. When you're in a startup, you have to focus a little bit and try to run a couple plays. And if they don't work, don't keep running after the ball. Change tactics, try to bring different contingencies together and get different stakeholders in the room. Somebody was putting in the comments about privacy being the last budget at the well. Mm-hmm. This is an important point. Not all CPOs are created equal. There's some of us that have reported up to the COO intentionally to have budget.
Or even the CEO. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that's the future. I think in the future, like the CFO, if you're dealing with data about customers, stockholders, and employees, you probably should be sitting and reporting directly to the CEO once you learn.
I totally support that. Yeah. I mean, privacy is part of trust and brand reputation. It's an important competitive advantage, and that reporting structure completely makes sense.
And your 10 tells you what your brand is. So help measure, look at those things that they care about, look at the risks, and I guarantee you're going to find some privacy goodness in those 10 Ks.
I'm loving all the substantive discussions that we've been having. I feel like we can go on all day, but I won't subject our listeners and viewers to that. I do want to address and pivot us to one of the topics that our listeners in advance and our folks in our community, the Rise of Privacy Tech, wanted us to address. It's Women's History Month, and I purposely wanted to feature the amazing work that you ladies have done. That said, some of our...
And you too, Lourdes, and you too.
Thank you. That said, some of the Rise of Privacy Tech community members wanted to hear about your experience as fearless founders in this space, particularly in fundraising. And maybe let's jump into Arti, if you could walk us through what are the tips that you want to share to some of those fearless female founders or potential founders out there who are considering jumping in. We'd love to, be able to give some of that feedback. I believe we had some commenters ask for advice about, they've been a privacy pro or a professional, an engineer for 20 plus years and want some advice on how to jump into this space and start building tools in privacy tech.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So obviously there's some, cliched responses that can be offered, which is basically find a problem, find a way to solve the problem, etc. I think what has served me really well is sticking to the substance. And I say that in the sense that if you find a really important problem, I think it's most important to build defensible, substantive, either technology or process behind it. Because I think an idea carries you so far, but having a very well thought out core to whatever it is you're trying to do, that is what gets you the meetings, the attention, the valuation, the funding, because a well understood problem is not something you have to tap dance around and sell. And so one of my personal goals when I started a new initiative is how much do I have to talk to convince somebody that this is a problem and my solution makes sense? And the less I have to talk, the better. And so I think if you do that, then there's a lot of support and a lot of money and a lot of community that will rally around you and your idea. And I find security and privacy actually is full of amazing people that want to support new initiatives. Like I am overwhelmed by the amount of support that I get and want to offer that to others as well. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm sure others can build on that feedback as well.
I love that. I mean, I think that there are so many problems to solve in the data privacy and data protection space in general. And with this comes just a lot of opportunity for a huge market. This is, again, like I said, the privacy tech is in its infancy. There are just amazing innovations that are happening now, and really a great opportunity to get involved. And I guess other than that, I would say just get a lot of sleep now, because you're going to be very busy and there will be many late nights. But it's absolutely worth it. And just take that risk. And by the way, you're calling us fearless founders. We started fundraising actually during the shelter in place when COVID hit. I can't say I was entirely fearless. It was a little freaky, right? To start actually working on building a company as a COVID founder. There are a lot of thoughts, and you just push through. And when you just know that what you're doing is going to work, and it's a problem that you care so deeply about, that that if you can fix this, you're going to change the lives of a lot of people working in this domain, then it's just totally worth it.
Thank you.
I'm usually the optimist. I want to give a little bit of a downer, and then you can leap us up at a high to close us out. It is Women's History Month. I'm also a pandemic founder. I didn't realize that was a term, but I'm going to adopt it, and I'm going to adopt your hearsay rule. So I'll probably just keep calling you Leila because your last name is overwhelming.
I'm cool with that.
But so I think here's the deal, guys. Here's the deal. In the best case scenario for women-led tech startups, we've had about 3% of the pie of startup capital. And that is from the money that you take in rather than inherited wealth or, 401k wealth, right? So that was before the pandemic. In 2020, we went down to about 2%, despite it being supposedly the year of the woman and invest in women-led, and everyone on their website says we want to talk to women founders. So here's the thing that we have to realize and recognize in this stage, in this era, and this sort of like crossover where we've got all of this sort of conversation restarted again about, instead of women's superiority, it really is, how do we have interoperable systems and bring all of our talents to the table? Know that as a woman founder, you must have your technology further ahead than any of the comparables. You must have your go-to-market plan, even if you don't have a product done yet. You must have documentation. You must have twice as many customers. And I've done the math and I've done the research. So I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just saying, like everything else in our profession, if you're doing a keynote, they're wearing comfortable shoes, you're wearing 4-inch stilettos and 2 pairs of Spanx. So be prepared. On, ladies, we've got this. But remember that, just because they're saying, oh, it's great, we love women founders, they're taking meetings. Are they writing checks? So let's fight together. Let's support each other. Women founders should not be sharp elbowing any other women founder. If anyone comes and wants advice from me and starts sharp elbowing, no, they're out of there, because privacy tech is precious. And as long as we're honest with ourselves and we're building the right kinds of solutions and we're doing the right kind of experiments, there's no reason why we can't actually implement solutions to make the world a better place. I'm sorry, Lourdes.
I'm with you. This is all about the privacy tech space, but I also am very fortunate and happy to be able to support fearless women founders like you. And with that, I want to be mindful of your time as founders. And I know we're up at 10:01 now. So I want to just wrap this up quickly and say thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Mickey and Leila and Arti, for joining us today and sharing with us your journey and your insights and more about your startups and your products. I'd love to invite you to share any calls to action that you might have or any closing words. And with that, happy Women's History Month, everyone. And thank you again to everyone who tuned in today. Go ahead. Leila.
Sure. Well, we are seeing incredible traction, and it's really exciting to see the difference that our product is making in the lives of people working in privacy and data protection. Our vision really is to be what Salesforce is to CRM, Reliance will be for compliance, privacy, and legal ops. So if you're interested in signing up for our waitlist, please go to Reliance.ai/waitlist.
That's great. I think I can offer a little bit of information about Titanium as well. Titanium, our name is spelled with an A, not a U, so Titaniam. And our website is Titanium Labs. But we're super active on LinkedIn. We have a great community. It's a wonderful place to find us. And we are, like I mentioned, an overall data protection company. We protect your data, personal or otherwise, across the whole life cycle. So if you feel like you want to try out next generation data protection or have a privacy use case, or even one of the most common requests we get is product owners that want privacy compliant products. If you have a product that you want to have a simple way, a few days to make it privacy compliant on the enforcement side, please contact me or just connect with me to say hello. I love the community and we just love to meet more people that share our interests. So thank you for the opportunity, Lourdes.
Thank you, Arti. And Nikki?
I'll be as quick as I can. So provatus.online is where you can find me for now. We're in stealth, again, retooling what we're building for the scoping workshops and execution on the shift left side of privacy. So watch that space. And Provatus, we do grow up and glow up for programs management. We do metrics evaluation, and we do mentoring. So we do sort of privacy dork as a service. So as you see people coming into the profession, don't be afraid to call us. We are there to promote and protect. And finally, Lourdes, I just wanted to say thank you to you. This community is so everything. We need to stick together as a community, be a recognized TAM space for the investors, and pretty soon we will have funds of our own, ladies. We will have fun of our own.
Yes, thank you so much, Lourdes. This is such an important initiative, and it's really exciting to see so many different founders, male, female, otherwise, getting into the privacy tech space, and I'm looking forward to staying involved with the rise of privacy tech.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
And with that, thank you, everyone. We're riseuprivacytech.com. We're also on Twitter and LinkedIn. And as you know, we have 2 big events per year. We just had Data Privacy Day, and we just released the call for speakers and sponsors for our virtual summit in June. So if you want to get involved, let us know. We also have a membership for innovators in the space, founders, investors, and experts who want to get involved in privacy tech. And we meet monthly for networking and have all sorts of amazing initiatives like our webcasts, and we're taking up the Rise of Privacy Tech landscape white paper this year. So if you want to get involved, let us know. Again, thank you, Arti, Mickey, and Leila, and everyone for tuning in. With that, I'm going to end and release these women to their startups, and thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you so
much.
much. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.